Did you go live yet?
I just went live.
And there we are.
There we are.
Hey, everybody.
What are you drinking there, by the way, buddy?
Regular Coke, which sucks. I don't really drink regular Coke. I drink Coke Zero, and this is awful.
Do you believe that Coke used to be made with cocaine?
Yes, I knew that. I did. I'm old enough to know that.
You're probably old enough to have sampled it too, right? No, I guess not.
No comment, Richard. Okay. Come on.
All right. So we're waiting for somebody. We're waiting for Who are we waiting for? Oh yeah, Kurtis. We're waiting for Kurtis, but we're not going to wait for
Mr. Metamaterials tattooed on his stomach.
Oh, I didn't realize it was that.
Yeah, he's got a tattoo of Metamaterials tattooed on his stomach. You didn't know that?
Is it a real tattoo, or is it like one of those henna?
That's what he told me. He told me that one of the very first times I talked to him. That and that Art Byrne was his sister.
Art, good old Art. That's good.
That's right, Daniel Crawford. Go Eagles.
That's actually one of my favorite female names.
What's that, Daniel Crawford?
No, Art.
Art.
Yeah, one of my favorite female names. So what we're going to do tonight, depending on, we have like a dual schedule here. If Kurtis shows up, we were concerned he had rented a jet and he was going to Europe, and I didn't know if he'd be back in time from his trip. So, we had to have like an alternative backup plan.
So I'm the backup plan. I'm the backup plan.
Yeah, that's you said it, not me. If Kurtis arrives, we will discuss a lot of MMTLP stuff. If he doesn't, we'll discuss more GTII stuff and some other topics that I don't know if you happen to see the topics yet.
I looked over them right before I logged in.
Okay. All right. So obviously it's not legal advice, and obviously that's
no, it's not.
It's not JR.
No, not even close.
Right. So before we start, obviously like, subscribe, share, comment. Make any suggestions to JR that you'd like. Oh, I see somebody. Maybe I see a name. I'm gonna put a body.
I'm having technical difficulties right now.
Aren't we all?
Yes.
Technical difficulties.
Just to let you know, before you say something that you may not want to say, you're on.
I see that. We're live.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So
happy Tuesday.
And we can see your exposed circle.
Which one?
The one you're speaking of.
Oh, crap. M. Casey said that I missed the bad jokes. I said the whole show's a bad joke.
That's right. So, do you have a Kurtis? What state do you live in?
Indiana.
Indiana. They have a great.
He's a Hoosier.
He's a Hoosier. Are you an Indiana basketball fan?
I am.
Okay. Were you a Bobby Knight fan?
6 banners. That's right.
It's too bad.
Isn't he going on camera? Why aren't you on camera, Kurtis?
I will be shortly. I'm trying to fix my technical issue.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just talking, I figured we could talk conversationally until he does it, because I didn't really want to bring attention to his deficiency there, unlike somebody else.
I never miss an opportunity.
I know. And you have professional football in Indianapolis, don't you?
We sure do, and we're 2-0.
All right, and so Philadelphia's 2-0 also, right?
Well, yeah, and we're world champions.
Well, for last year, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't.
And we'll be this year too. Don't worry about it.
And the Rams are playing Philadelphia next week, I believe.
Who?
The 2-0 Rams. When they start. You start
the 2-1 Rams. Is that what you said? The 2-1 Rams.
Yeah, the reason why teams don't repeat is demonstrated by their fan base. Obviously. Kurtis. So before I thought we'd kind of go through your history and all the medical exams you've had. But besides that, I was going to take you through a little bit of MMTLP Just if you could bring in the current news, then I have a few questions, and then we can talk about GTI and about 19 other things. In the meantime, I hadn't got a chance to kind of lay out a couple of things. What do you call a stationary convention in Philadelphia?
I don't know. What is it?
Pennsylvania.
Oh my God.
Wow. That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's hear the next one.
Did you hear that the Cowboys might score a touchdown when they play in Philly next week when their plane lands in the airport? Yes? No? Okay.
Yes,
Philadelphia. I'm focusing on Philadelphia because one of us here is from Pennsylvania, I believe. Philadelphia Cream Cheese's new ad calls a competitor's marketing campaign a mere schmear campaign.
Or do you use Chat GPT for these jokes?
No. All right. So kind of what I wanted to start off with, and we have two more to end, of course. I kind of wanted to start off is since one of us knows more than the other two about a certain topic, I wanted to start off that if you could kind of bring us up to date in any kind of new public, all I want is public stuff, obviously. Any public information regarding MMTLP?
Oh, I thought since you were referring vaguely to a topic that one of us knew better than the other two, that we were still going to be talking about football. But if you want to switch to MMTLP, we can do that.
Yeah, let's try MMTLP. Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Well,
Nice.
I'm technically blind right now, so I actually had documents that I wanted to share, but
great.
I'll reference them instead. So, some recent developments that have happened really since mid-July, all the way through the first week of September, have been associated with Freedom of Information Act requests that have been granted. And, that's been an ongoing effort for the MMTLP investor community all along. But, I think the things that have been revealed recently have confirmed some suspicions that we've had for a long time. And maybe the most notable is that the SEC was not just a participant after the halt, which we knew. We knew, through very public testimony, like the Senate Banking Committee, that Gary Gensler kind of didn't feign complete knowledge, but distanced the SEC and himself from the decision of issuing a U3 extraordinary market event halt. He points the finger clearly at FINRA, but up until that point, there was no hard evidence that the SEC was a party to the decision, in the middle of the decision with the U3 halt, or shortly thereafter with the issuance of the MMTLP FAQ, which is published on FINRA's portal to this day. And so what these emails have revealed, and these are, and I wish I could show this right now. If I can figure this out, I'll do a screen share. But what these emails show is that the highest levels of leadership, including Gary Gensler's direct reports, they were discussing before the halt, which we knew. There's famous emails that were released in April of 2023, just a few short months after the halt, that disclosed Sam Dratty, head of the National Crimes and Fraud Detection at FINRA, was communicating back and forth with individuals that were redacted at the SEC. And that's interesting because that alone, the acknowledgement of fraud and market manipulation in a security, would be justification to not process that same securities corporate actions, which of course they did the very next day, not just the next business day, but literally the next day. And that was on December 6th of 2022. But the interesting pieces that have come to light here in the last couple months have been emails where we now have some of the redacted parties from the SEC. And as you can imagine, high-level leadership at FINRA and high-level leadership at the SEC are the two parties that are conversing back and forth. But the very interesting piece is probably why, while we were talking one night, having some discussions regarding Eagles versus 49ers versus Rams versus Colts, whatever, on Sunday Night Football, literally the night of Sunday, December 11th, which was mid-halt. The halt was issued on December 9th, 2022. Just a couple days later, on Sunday night, FINRA and the SEC are conversing back and forth about an emergency meeting in regards to MMTLP's U3 halt. And at that time, the investor community had been absolutely hammering both the SEC and FINRA with communications and complaints, trying to get any level of transparency, obviously reaching out to broker dealers. It was a lot of communication that was being issued. And so they called for an emergency meeting, and that meeting was held on that following Monday, December 12th. And what that confirms is the SEC was actually a party to the decision-making process, and ultimately, like, they deleted the ticker. So a few days later, although this actually wasn't completed and didn't show as a deletion event until much later, the SEC let things play out. They basically let FINRA's decision stand. And again, every bit of testimony, every formal communication that's been in existence, whether it be from the top of the house with Gary Gensler, the former SEC chair.
Yeah, I was going to actually ask you.
Other...
I was going to ask you about that. So, because you were speaking about deletion. So I know that there were a large number of texts that were deleted off at least Gensler's equipment. I don't know how far it spread beyond that. And I know the discussion was because Coinbase is involved in litigation with the SEC. Yeah. And I saw that they filed some kind of motion recently as to the destruction of evidence. So I know, I think I heard you talking about it. Is there some a belief that texts related to MMTLP were destroyed also?
I don't have any doubt, although I don't have any 100% confirmation that there were direct text messages related to MMTLP. The interesting piece about Gary Gensler and the SEC as, I just view the entire leadership team under the previous administration under the same umbrella. But when you look at the time period of those text messages that were deleted, it's from October of 2022, and it goes all the way until September of 2023. And where that overlaps in important time and dates for MMTLP is you had the final revisions in the S1 amendment for the registration statement that was for MMTLP to be effectively spun out into NextBridge Hydrocarbons. So that's one important date. Obviously, the U3 halt took place in December of 2022, but then the September date is very interesting on the back end, because at that point in time, Congress, and we see this again in recent Freedom of Information Act requests that have been released, but at that point in time, Congress started sending communications in June and July directly to the SEC. And you have letters like that of now Vice President J.D. Vance and Mike Crapo that co-signed a letter directly to Gary Gensler asking for transparency in regards to MMTLP. But I think the very interesting date is, September 6th was I believe the end cap date of when the texts were lost. And that is the week preceding the Senate Banking Committee, where Mike Crapo famously grilled, using his entire allotment of time to ask questions specifically pertaining to MMTLP. And I think we have the most meaningful responses from Gary Gensler in that video testimony. But and the questions were submitted right up until the point that the text messages are deleted. So it would be interesting to see that. But I think maybe something that's even more interesting is the claim of the deletion of those text messages and the wiping of the device Interestingly enough, earlier, this is not like a long time ago. This is within the last 9 months, I believe. We have one of the community members who has really led the charge in Freedom of Information Act requests. So he issued a request for Gary Gensler's text messages, and some of these text messages are within the same exact deletion responsive period. So we do have a feel for some of the text messages that have been deleted, because not just who the counterparties were, but we can actually see the text messages, but you can't see the full context of the situation because they have been redacted. Now, I think what would become interesting for both Coinbase, obviously the FTX scandal played out in the same time frame. There's a lot of crypto concern here and other securities. I think there's enough justification, not just with the destruction of records, but those records that have been made public, that have been released through other FOIAs, removing the redaction of those records. We'll see.
Yeah. Were you going to say something, JR?
No.
Finally?
No, I was reading the comments.
I was hoping some words were coming out of your mouth. Besides,
well, Coin, I don't know what the motion was that Coinbase filed, but the gist of what they were getting at was there might have been conversations about the definition of a security in some of the, I think, altcoins or tokens that Coinbase was offering, and that because the texts were deleted, I forget what the legal term is, that it tainted the lawsuit or something like that. That's their position.
Yeah. So I'll take a little bit of different tack, because I think it depends on the jurisdiction. So in some jurisdictions, let's say if you're in a jury trial, for example, there would be a jury instruction given to the jury, and it would say like, the scumbags to my left destroyed a bunch of evidence and they're not very trustworthy. So keep that in mind when you go to the jury box. That's a slight exaggeration, of course. And, in some other states, there might be like a presumption that's created if you destroy evidence, so that you have a burden that you didn't have before, just makes it harder to win. That's kind of the bottom line. So it's always interesting when somebody does. And a lot of times you will see that if there's a case that's about to start, one side will send a notice out to the other side, say, don't destroy any evidence, you scumbag, because you don't want them to destroy evidence. And if they do after you gave them a notice, then that even looks like more extreme. One thing I wanted to ask you, Kurtis, besides, and you could, by the way, you can add whatever you want in any terms of any current information. And again, I'm only interested in public information, although I'm interested in private information. If you want to spill the beans, that's okay too. But I'm only going to press you on public information. If you have anything else to add about anything currently that has struck you with regard to MMTLP, you could jump on at any point in time. I was going to ask you a kind of a different question about MMTLP or related. So what happens is, and I want you to speculate here a little bit. So I know that S1, the NextBridge S1's been dangling out there for a long time, right? That's my understanding. Am I incorrect? Is anybody alive out there?
Kurtis, you're on mute.
I was struggling to come off mute. I'm almost overcoming the technical difficulties, so I should be joining you on video here shortly. But yes, you are correct. It's been since February of 2023 that they've been waiting.
And what's the point of the S1?
It is limited to share sale for 40 million, up to 40 million shares. It doesn't have to be 40 million, but up to 40 million shares to accredited investors of NextBridge Hydrocarbons. So it's a capital raise.
Right. So what happens, and they've been waiting to do it for quite some time, correct?
Correct.
So if they're able to do that, how does that change the equation? So let's say, just for the sake of discussion, October 1st, they're able to sell off those shares. How does that change the equation?
In many different ways, it changes the equation. So one, it gives the company a lot of flexibility because they're running short on funds. They did just do another issuance of a capital raise. I believe it was $6 million, but it gives them a lot of flexibility. It also would be interesting. Yeah, with accredited investors, you already have a limited buying pool, right? But when Roth was initiating and fielding potential offers and floating this out there, and I think this has been publicized, but there were some, actually NextBridge put out a press release in regards to this where some entities, I'll just refer to them as entities, were seeking a multiple of the 2.65 million shares that FINRA disclosed are still unresolved short positions in MMTLP NextBridge Hydrocarbons. So it would be interesting from who the interested in accredited investors would be. One, obviously it's a capital raise, so it gives a lot of flexibility to the company itself. And yeah, I think that affords a lot of other options. I think, if we were to just look at a 30,000 foot view as to what those who do not wish NextBridge Hydrocarbons and the MMTLP liabilities to succeed, I think, their wish is for the company to go bankrupt and for those liabilities to be forever buried.
So the approval of the S1, you would say, would be a positive step then?
An overwhelmingly positive step.
Okay. Any reason to this point in time? Any reason given for, because that 2 years is a long time. Is there any rationale that's been provided for the approval being delayed so long to the current?
Well, unfortunately, we can't see both sides of the communication. So what we're limited to is the company, and I think this is, what was it, February? I believe it was February of this year, issued a press release in regards to the communication back and forth between the SEC. The SEC basically demanded that they restate the financials. And that's the important release today, was a restatement of 2 previous years of financials. So
right.
It's
and part of that
interesting was after the fact when we see the communications. 45 days after effectiveness, they can publish the correspondence back and forth.
If I recall, they needed to restate or re-audit the financials because they had Borgers as their CPA, and Borgers was smashed by the SEC and banished somewhere. I don't know where, but they couldn't do any kind of work anymore. And it takes, I guess, a long time to be certain. We've had that in GTII. It's Borgers and GTI also. And it creates a big delay because it creates a big delay because what was that?
Apologize. And DJT. It was also the same auditor for DJT
really?
as well.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
Yeah. Obviously, they haven't done a super job. So do you have any expectations of the S1 being approved anytime soon?
I have a lot of things that I anticipate. Am I in twice? Oh, look, I'm in.
Now you're echoing.
Oh, there you are. I do see you now.
Am I
on from my screen. Oh,
there you are. There you are.
All right.
Look at that.
There he is.
Look at that.
I'm even wearing my you guys couldn't see it before, but I'm wearing my Colts polo. I do anticipate eventually the S1 being approved. I do.
So you would think that would be a monumental shift in how things have gone to this point.
I think it takes one of the important tactics that the other side is deploying, with hoping that the company goes bankrupt.
Do you have any concern that the shares would be sold to short interests?
I I have ultimate certainty that they would likely be sold to entities that were looking to close out liabilities.
Is there any way to discriminate in terms of the sale, those private sales?
It's a good question. I don't know. I don't know that answer. I don't know it definitively.
Yeah. Yeah, because obviously, I understand if you need money, you got to raise money, and maybe you have a little more leverage if it's people on the short side. You could obviously charge a lot more, and perhaps you could redistribute some of that money also back to your shareholders. If you did a big enough raise. But I know we've heard about that S1 for quite some time. So I'm just hoping that it moves forward. I'd heard some like stuff in the air, and so it's good to speculate. We like to speculate, and so besides the S1, what event? Because one of my questions was, what do you think is going to happen first? I want to see if JR read this. What's going to happen?
I read
first?
this part.
Okay, what's going to happen first? The MMTLP blue sheets are going to be released, or the Epstein files? What's going first?
I'm going to go with. Are they in redacted form or unredacted?
They're both unredacted.
Oh, okay. I'll go blue sheets.
Blue sheets. All right. Okay. Besides like the blue sheets, what event?
I must be chopped liver.
What event besides that do you think would be, a changing event that it's not wouldn't be complicated? But what do you think? What kind of disclosure or event do you think would change things?
That is a really good question.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's a really good question. So I don't know. We've talked about this previously. I don't know if a hearing is anything other than a dog and pony show. It all depends on the intent. But honestly, if you have additional broker dealers that have the same conundrum that TradeStation has, and there have been a couple where they can't fulfill the transfer of shares on their customer's behalf to the transfer agent, you're basically acknowledging that you oversold the position, right? That you lent out more shares than your overall allotment. Right. You're oversold on the plane, right? So that would be incredibly damning. And I think I like to use history and facts and data in order to answer that question. And I'll give it one quick example. And now that I actually have my computer now, maybe I can do a screen share too. But the Financial Information Forum is a trade agency that all of these major financial institutions belong to. Everyone's got a seat at the table. And what's interesting is there's an unauthenticated kind of news portlet that you can see that are to both members and non-members. So it's publicly accessible. Not something that anybody that would not be working in the industry would be paying attention to, but it's put out there. And there's also, on the authenticated space, working groups where you need a username and password in order to see the information. And this Financial Information Forum, they created in August of 2023. And remember, when Gary Gensler's text messages were deleted from October of 2022 to September of 2023. In August, the Financial Information Forum created a working group, a permanent back office working group that was headed up by the Chief Compliance Officer of TradeStation, Nikki Brinkerhoff, who actually happens to be now one of the sitting members of FINRA's Uniform Practice Code Committee that makes decisions like the U3 halt and corporate action deficiency notices. So how ironic that this person is so integral in all these different things related to MMTLP. But when you look at these notices, they created this working group, and what they created the working group in regards to was for not the S1 that you're questioning, but it was actually the second registration statement that was going to be for distribution of NewCo, which was going to be a separate value prop. And I think the impotence of creating this working group was
and it's disclosed right here. You don't even have to speculate. They were talking about topics for all their participants with DTCC T+1, which affects the entirety of the securities industry. And then the second topic was Nikki Brinkerhoff heading up the Next Bridge Hydrocarbons S1 and subscription rights that would, and just for context, this is August of 2023 on a company that was an OTC company that hasn't traded in, I don't know, I'm no mathematician, 9 months. And it's the second most important recurring topic that justifies creating a permanent sub-working group. I think I can read through the subtext pretty clearly on that. So what is their concern? Why create a group? You know, what would cause a change in the landscape? Their concern was clearly that registration statement, the incentive was provided for shareholders of NextBridge Hydrocarbons to transfer their shares from their broker dealer, where their shares are held in street name, in their broker dealer's names, under Charles Schwab, under Fidelity, right? And instead, when they move them to the transfer agent, they could gain access to these mystery shares of Newco. But it's not Newco that they're concerned about, right? It's, in my opinion, this is just my opinion. It's speculation.
This is your opinion. This is not fact.
This is my opinion. They didn't tell me what they're concerned about.
Okay, not yet. They
didn't, not yet. But clearly they were concerned enough to create a permanent sub-working group and provide weekly recurring updates on this working group. So it was obviously of concern. I think their concern is being able to take the shares outside of circulation to where their imbalance is ultimately revealed on a broker by broker basis. So we've been asking for, if you were to put a headline on this, we've been asking for a share count to do just that. But if there were enough investors that moved their shares to the transfer agent and ultimately took them out of circulation and proved the imbalance that would exist, that's ultimately what happened with TradeStation. Is so many people moved to the point where TradeStation said, we can't accommodate any more transfers. And they had to disclose why in a compliance email. And that happened to ironically be sent from the same compliance officer, Nikki Brinkerhoff of TradeStation, the first broker dealer that raised their hand. So I think, you know, I can read through that subtext and what the behavior tells me, but I think anything that proves that share imbalance or quantifies it is their number one concern. If there were a strip down of FINRA's immunity, that would probably be the same ultimate result as well.
Draddy, if I recall, worked also at the SEC prior, right?
He sure did.
Yeah. Not that that's a conflict or anything, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
I think the whole thing is conflict. So everything that's not bad is actually the conflict. If you follow that, because I did. JR, did you have anything to ask?
How can I add anything to that?
I don't know. Do you have any expectation? Do you have any expectation time wise? Before you collect Social Security?
That would be wonderful. Yeah, that would be wonderful. That's that might be an ambitious timeline, but we'll see. That's next year.
What do you think of Atkins? What do you think of Atkins so far?
Hard to say. You know, I think he's accomplished his agenda that he's obviously prioritized. Unfortunately, it has nothing to do with MMTLP or, you know, ending naked short selling, enforcing stock settlement. None of those things have been a priority thus far. So I don't know. I'm still in the honeymoon phase, and I'm starting to question priorities and whether or not the attention. So the agenda was recently released. I'm sure you saw that.
Yeah.
And reaffirmed. And enforcing security settlement is nowhere on there.
Well, there's another thing that happened. I think it was recent.
I was just going to say, I mean, his priorities are Trump's priorities. I think the last 24 hours, that's abundantly clear.
Yeah, because one of their proposals, and I don't know, you know, how far along it is, but to get rid of the quarterly reporting requirements.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's probably the opposite direction that we need. We don't need less disclosure. I think we need more disclosure. I think their excuse was it is caught because of the cost, the extra cost that has caused a lot of companies to stay private. And and private companies are not accessible for most traders. So that's their logic. I just think it's a way for them to be less transparent and spend less money in accounting. That's kind of where I see it. I think it's a bad idea.
I think there's going to be people in finance and accounting that lose their jobs if that goes through.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the bottom line. That's what's going to happen.
And they were also saying, a lot of people who do options and those kind of that are basically trading on the financials, that those kind of people, it will really make that hard to trade because you're not going to have those shocks, positive or negative, and it's going to make it harder to trade. And I don't know how that plays out, but it kind of goes back to the underlying point. I don't really think that's like a beneficial strategy for retail's benefit. And again, I've been skeptical. In just my personal opinion, I'm skeptical of Atkins and whatever his particular interests are. But I'm willing to be willing to be wrong, and I hope I'm wrong. And I will admit I'm wrong if that happens. That'd be wonderful. But it's kind of tough, right, to kind of figure out time-wise. And I guess the other issue is, and we've had this issue happen, unfortunately, more than once, is midterms start next, the election's going to start, basically the end of the first quarter. And unless kind of that issue is resolved before then the focus goes elsewhere, I think. And it's harder to get it resolved, and you end up kind of dealing with the next Congress. It's kind of like me trying to get and I've been literally trying this. This is literally like me getting StubHub to send me the correct tickets. Basically the same thing. I put it in the same category of as much success as dealing with Congress. So I mean, I sure hope that in the next quarter that there is a dramatic move. And I don't know. I don't follow the litigation as carefully as probably you do. Maybe you can kind of give us a quick update, at least as far as you understand it.
Yeah, I think, there's the litigation exists on multiple fronts, right? So it's hard to keep up with all the cases. And honestly, I rely in some parts on the cliff notes from others that are following each other case closely. But the most interesting one to me personally, because I was an investor in both MetaMaterials Inc. and Torchlight, was how I acquired a majority of my shares of MMTLP. I'm following the Nevada bankruptcy case very closely, and we'll see what happens there. There's obviously a lot going on. There's a little sideshow that's going on as well there. I think it's very interesting, and I love you came into an X space and shared your opinion live on that. When FINRA filed their motion to quash, it was a no-lose scenario for them, right? There's no risk associated with taking that position, and it's obvious that they've exhausted all efforts to not provide any level of transparency, even from data that we know that they've already had and that emails have confirmed that they've already shared. So we know that they're going to exhaust every effort there and continue that. But I do think it's interesting and a little bit of a game changer personally. At least it's been in the conversations that I've had that are not all congressional conversations. A lot of it is, the executive admin conversations that they're very interested in, and not to be political, but they are very interested in making this a political argument and blaming prior leaders in the prior administration for some of the fallout. So in the event that they can point to specific actions or inactions to create some culpability and justification for what could be fallout from taking an unpopular action and holding some people accountable, then I think that's ultimately what will happen. But it does take persistence, especially from MMTLP community. It takes persistence because it is not as large of a community as other investor communities, and so there's been a renewed effort to renew SEC complaints, OIG complaints. I honestly don't think there's any coincidence that the OIG report that concluded in September of 2024 was just released in September of 2025, while this community is issuing constant FOIAs, constant SEC complaints through every avenue. So I think eventually the dam breaks.
Okay. And the question we can't answer is the timing. Obviously, it's kind of.
So I mean, it's what time is it? It's 8:48 Eastern. I mean, still got a few hours left before it's 9:17. So I mean, it could be today.
Yeah, it'd be nice. It'd be nice if we could report on it before the end of the live stream. It's very possible. I know JR has a direct line, so you never know. You never know.
What direct line to where? I'm reading the comments.
Yeah. So what I kind of wanted to ask you, you're also in GTII, right?
I'm not actually.
Okay. Have you followed it all?
I follow mostly through your updates.
So I babble about it. I babble about it a lot. So I kind of, and I don't know, how confusing it is when I state it, because it can be very confusing, and I'm welcome. I'm open to that. So I kind of wanted to say is, anything that you might want to ask about it that might be confusing to you, JR or Kurtis, that I could maybe illustrate a point. And if you had read the subjects, JR, you would know that. That maybe I can illustrate it. So and I'll give you like a few seconds before I'll put you on the spot. But I just attended the deposition of one of the officers and directors, and again, the interesting part, the thing about GTII, which is interesting, is it's not only the regulators, it's the management. So you got a combo effect. And there's probably others, by the way. There's probably other shareholders, I believe, that may not have the interests of all shareholders too.
Right.
And it is just a bear. And it just, how the difficulty in MMTLP, it's repeated in every kind of ticker that we do. And it makes it nearly impossible to confront and to battle with the money, because the money is, it's part of their business plan. And we don't have that. We don't. They've taken it. Anyway, were you gonna say something, JR?
Yeah, the short thesis is, we short a company because we don't believe in it's making going to make a profit, or we short a company because we think it's a bullshit, bogus company, and management is out to, do nothing but sell shares and make money. And the short thesis with GTII, really was accurate, as we know. The company was a shell. Management was raping and plundering and pillaging the entire, shares. I mean, that's abundantly clear from the SEC filings that the receivers filed, as well as all the deep dive that you've done over now the last 3 years. The problem they had is retail investors caught on and knew that there was a large short position. Now they're trapped. Richard, it's a complete shit show. The last time we talked about it, it's almost becoming comical when you and I, have these conversations. But for the work that you did, we wouldn't have known any of that. We would not have been the wiser on what was really happening at GTII.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I was going to say, what reminds me about why GTII is similar to me to the bankruptcy is because you have somebody in that same role. We have a receiver, you have a trustee, and they have a lot of power and control over how things go. They both, in some part, are governed by, this is a job for them, and they got to make a living. And so you kind of have to closely monitor how they go about that, because their interests are not align directly with shareholders' interests. It's just kind of the way. That doesn't mean that they're bad people or they're acting improperly. It's just kind of the way of the world. They're doing something else because a bankruptcy trustee is trying to raise as much money as they can from creditors or to pay off creditors. That's the bottom line, and they get a cut. They're making money based upon what they're bringing in. The receiver is the same way, and it's confusing, I think, sometimes as to when somebody's acting in whose interest they actually are acting. And I know it's frustrating because I know you know, like you say, you're watching the bankruptcy, and you'd like the bankruptcy trustee, and I don't know because I haven't followed that carefully, but you'd like the bankruptcy trustee to go full bore and be, you know, super aggressive. And for them, they have to evaluate whether it makes economic sense within that thing to do it. And that may not be the same mindset that, you know, shareholders have. And I find that's really confusing and difficult. I know, like in GTII, they tried to, the irony is they tried to bankrupt the company. At least I'm told they tried to bankrupt the company before the receiver was put in place. So they tried to beat the receiver to the court. They must have thought, they had a better shot in bankruptcy, because in bankruptcy, the trustee can decide not to pursue assets, not to pursue claims. They can do that.
Right.
The other thing is, and I haven't heard anybody discuss that, but those claims, you could buy those claims. So there's a bunch of claims that are and I'm referring to the bankruptcy, for example. So there's a bunch of claims that are in the bankruptcy. You might be able to sue X, Y, and Z or whatever. Those are purchasable. I mean, you can actually acquire the claims and then pursue those claims, and it's that they don't lose any value or validity just because they kind of went through the bankruptcy. And usually, because they go through the bankruptcy, you can get them really cheaply because the trustees is trying to raise, a few bucks. So there may be claims that might give you certain access. And I haven't heard anybody discuss it, by the way, but there may be claims maybe against a particular broker that you might want to pursue because it might give you particular access that you don't have. And that would be different than the trustee. And that might be a strategic move. You actually just select a broker that and now you could pursue the same discovery that the trustee has control over. Now a private person might have the control over them to pursue that same claim. So anyway, I know it's really confusing, but the thought is that, and again, not bad people or whatever, but their interests are maybe different, and you have to be very careful kind of watching that. And, obviously in GTII, as JR, I talked to JR, we talk about this kind of funny sometimes, but there's a lot of people that are concerned, more than me, by the way, concerned about the interests of the receiver in our case. And but it was interesting to see the one of the officers and directors didn't understand that he had a duty to shareholders. I was kind of surprised by that. And then when he was asked specifically, or understood now, that he could have some huge tax liability, the color in his face changed very dramatically. And that was kind of like, that was being subservient to a friend who was going to act nicely to him, and took advantage, in my opinion, of everybody and whatever. And as we can see, in all these situations, there are often people that have their own self-interest that are different than the majority, and it makes it difficult, frustrating, difficult. You wear yourself out. Anything of interest you see there, JR? I can see you scanning.
Yeah, there was a question there for Kurtis, but it's a little confusing, and I asked him to elaborate a little bit more. So go ahead. Once he does, I'll ask.
Okay. So for those out there who are in GTII also, so I think AIversity is still waiting for the receiver to communicate with them. They're the company that would be taking over GTII. I think that hasn't changed. It appears that the receiver through counsel are now pursuing the shares that are disputed shares. And that's really messy also because there's, in my opinion, there's potential criminal responsibility. And so when somebody testifies in a civil proceeding, they have to decide whether they're going to take the fifth or not. Because, maybe like, and I'll give you a difference here. So like, and I'm just going to pick a name out of the hat. Let's say pick David Reichman. That's just a wild name. But if it was Kurtis, and Kurtis is 30 years old, and David Reichman might be 82, then the strategy that you might take might be very different. For David Reichman, if he was testifying and if he thought he had like information that might incriminate him, then he might be willing to just kind of take the fifth and kind of roll the dice that by the time things shook out, maybe he wasn't as warm as he was before. He's in a different state, if you follow me there. Yeah. And, somebody who's of a younger age, they're on the hook. They can't escape. You could escape it for a while, but eventually it tracks you down and it causes unbelievable stress. But anyway, we really shouldn't have to be going. It's kind of like, two sides of a coin, just two different stocks, two different examples of problems that we really should not be experiencing and that haven't been taken seriously by the SEC or FINRA. And, in the GTII case, Alpine is like the star child for, being scumbags, and they're still out there. And, with no explanation, no real explanation why. That's the part that's the part that is really concerning, because we all speculate that perhaps the regulators are influenced by others, and when you see certain actions, that's one of the things you certainly conclude that there may be other motivations that are are lubing the decision-making process. And that part really is difficult because it's hard to control. It's hard to know. I think I told you one time, I've been in front of a lot of judges. I would say like a handful of times there was like rulings that were so bizarro that I thought, yeah, that could have been but I'm saying it was like a really small percentage of the time, but where something just didn't make sense and there had to be some intervening act. And then I had one time where a client was in the cell phone business, but he wasn't like one of the like it was the time of LA Cellular, so it was like AT&T, these big companies. He was competing against them, and they set up like a sting operation at his store in broad daylight just to kind of make it well known. And he had like a sergeant come up to him and directly ask for a bribe. I mean, like put $50,000 into a paper bag, put it in this locker, and we'll help you on the case. So that didn't happen a lot, but I'm saying it has happened. So can somebody be influenced by getting a payoff or something like that? Of course it can happen. And it may not just be, we are focused on one or two matters, but these people are involved. They might be handling, hundreds of matters. There might be all kinds of other issues that we don't focus on because we don't know about it. Doesn't affect it. I know, like, if I'm investing in a stock that Brian doesn't know about, then you have a different view of everything. So I've babbled. Any comments?
Well, I agree. I don't think it's limited to a couple of securities, although there are very interesting. I haven't gone through the deep dive with GTI nearly to the extent that obviously you two have, but at the absolute surface, there are things that are beyond coincidence. When you look at but I don't think this is isolated to just these two tickers. But when you look at who the market makers are, when you look at any OTC securities, the overwhelming majority, when you look at FINRA's issuer data, is limited to de minimis firms, right? So they don't even meet the reporting threshold requirements. But when you look at GTI and you look at MMTLP when it traded, it's the same actors, the same exact actors that participate in the same tactic over and over again. So, and why, right? Who are their counterparties? Who are their relationship? And it's very interesting when you start connecting all of the dots and all of the shared liabilities. But I certainly don't think that it's isolated. I do think that fortunately, with some of these select investor communities that people have been sharing information, I think organization and kind of the grassroots efforts and the information sharing live through social media, things like this, and kind of educating everybody has been a mass awakening where people start to understand and they share the information to kind of put together the pieces of the puzzle live on the fly. So I definitely don't think that it's isolated, because the more you look back at other instances and just trying to find precedent for things that we think are unprecedented, but if you dig hard enough, you can find similar instances of things that have occurred. And there's always something unique, but I think it's a repeated blueprint that is repeated time and time again.
It's interesting, the industry, you were talking about public social media, but it's interesting. I find like the anti really interesting also, so the anti groups that pop up, some of them, maybe motivated by money, I presume some are getting paid or whatever. That's kind of a
Sure.
gig, whatever. And some maybe just kind of like miserable people and just kind of want to attack others and kind of take it down. So I find it interesting that like whole indices out of the misery that's created by, our financial system, which hopefully still is, relatively safe and will go on. I know there is a New York exchange, a New York Texas exchange. It's got a weird name. It's not in Texas. It's in New York. I think it's under the New York Exchange. I don't think there's a lot of stocks that are being traded on it yet, but I think the idea is, to have immediate settlement and kind of get rid of a lot of the issues that we speak about. I don't know the difficulty because I've never done it. I have no idea the difficulty of getting something like that established. You'd obviously have to get a bunch of big companies, I think, involved to trade on your platform. Have you heard anything about that? No?
Definitely not anything about BlackRock or Citadel backing it, or who those entities are associated with. No, totally not familiar with that.
Okay. What are you laughing about, JR?
Kurtis's response.
Okay.
My smart ass responses.
Yeah.
All right. Do you want to ask me anything about GTI before I move on to something else?
Yes, actually I do. Because I'm learning a little bit more about John Forster and AI Versity, a little bit more, and some of the connections that he has, and again, some very interesting overlapping interests. What's your take? What's your public take on John?
I have no reason to.
Well, we grilled the shit out of him the first time we talked to him.
yeah, we did Trento Mines. I don't know if you ever saw that. We did Trento Mines on John the first time. I've spoken to him a number of times. Unless he's like the greatest actor of all time, which is possible, I really do believe he has retail shareholders' interests at heart. Now, I don't think it's all benevolent. I think, he's got a business to run, and I think he'd like retail shareholders to kind of attach themselves to him. But separate and apart from that, my impression is that he really is interested in GTI shareholders. And I think, honestly, there have been plenty of times I think he could have bailed and moved on, and probably found, some other shell or entity to do it. But I think he really does, especially once he kind of got involved, I think he does feel an obligation to shareholders, even though it's not his company.
Yeah,
So,
I'll add to that too. I
yeah.
talked to him. I talked to him a bunch of times when we were in that hearing last February, and he's a decent guy. He means well. His heart is in this, and to Richard's point, it's not all benevolent, but he's open about that. You know, he pretty much has said, look, I need retail to be on my side. Retail are my customers, so I want to do right by them. So yeah, he's a decent guy. He's here to help. He means well, and he wants to move the ball forward. So
that's been my impression as well. That's but it's nice to hear you both having more firsthand experience with John. It's great hearing that.
Yeah, I mean, I've spoken to him many times, but you know, if he tells me something that he wants in confidence, then I respect his confidence. As I indicated, I've tried to get the receiver to be more direct, and even if they told me to shut up about it, and that has not been successful to date, unfortunately. Excuse me. But it is frustrating, by the way. The whole, and you know, there's a lot of crossover shareholders, MMTLP, GTII, because I see them, and they've had to undergo both. You know, both scenarios. It's not easy, and people lose patience, and you know, the legal system's incredibly slow. We've been in the receivership for 1 year already. So I feel bad for everybody. I think I've told JR before, GTII, and I think it was a healthier strategy. I just kind of wrote it off. So in my head, it's a 0. So it causes, and it is a 0 in my mind. It's not like I'm pretending. I've been able to convince myself for this purpose, and it doesn't cause me any stress, and it doesn't cause me any stress in terms of making decisions. But I don't have that ability with all stocks that I'm in either. And most people, you know, it's just that's the hardest part. I think that's the hardest part of investing, is not letting the emotional part make your decisions for you, because those decisions are oftentimes not in your own interest. But I understand how pissed off and just worn out people are. I mean, you know, how much time have you spent on MMTLP? Just, you know, hundreds and hundreds of, I know, probably thousands and thousands of hours by now. And
more than I'm comfortable with.
Yeah, which is the unfortunate part. Without that, you have no chance.
Right.
I mean, you got to kind of make an ungodly amount of investment of your own personal time multiplied by the number of people that are doing it. And that's why they get away with that stuff, because otherwise it's just too difficult to do. What were we going to say, JR?
I was just going to say, it takes over your life.
Yeah.
It takes over your life. It becomes your life.
And, you know, for a lot of people, it appeared, you know, I don't know, you guys probably know better, but for, you know, a lot of people that didn't have a lot of money, or they put their money in something that's like, you know, a life-changing event that they may never be able to recover from. And I can understand why that would have such a shock to their system. You know, it's really unfortunate, and I really feel bad for for everybody. And it's a bunch of people.
Honestly, it's one of the reasons that I've stayed so in tune with it, is not for personal financial losses or potential losses, because you know you can recover. It wasn't something that was so heavily concentrated for me personally, but watching people's lives get ripped apart, and we've all been affected, obviously, and the time consumption is the one thing that everyone has in common, regardless of monetary losses. Everyone has lost an enormous amount of time, and it's crazy to think that we're coming up on 3 years from the halt date. But for me, it precedes that, and for many people, it precedes, you know, going back in Torchlight, the original parent company, many years. So it's crazy, but you know, because of the human element, and because of the impact, and because there is what I believe to be regulatory malfeasance that's involved, and there's evidence of clear wrongdoing. There's a rule and procedure that was not adhered to. That's why I ultimately see, and the people that we've discussed this with, right, that are completely objective, that have no horse in the race, and they say, whoa, this is clearly wrong. This is clearly wrong, and it's indefensible. So eventually I think it ends very favorably, but unfortunately for some people, they're not gonna, the damage has been done, right? It doesn't matter how it, if there's ultimate resolution for all these different investor communities, and you really enforce stock settlement, at the end of the day, the damage has been done.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you ever repay people that have been suffering for this period of time. So
you can't.
One quick note before, because you did drop the Texas Stock Exchange, and I was obviously being facetious when I said I'm not familiar with it, or some of the primary investors. I'll go back to the recent Freedom of Information Act requests that show who the parties were at the SEC that were conversing back and forth with FINRA before, during, and after the halt. And one of them is David Saltiel, who is the senior leader of the Division of Trading and Markets at the SEC, part of Gary Gensler's reporting tree. And he is now senior managing director of firm-wide strategy for the Texas Stock Exchange.
Oh, interesting.
How delightful.
Yeah, I'm sure you can trust that. I'm sure.
Yep.
It's interesting. I'll leave it at interesting. Did you see that Robert Redford died? Do you know who Robert Redford is?
I do. Yeah, he's got one of the
I have to ask
best
the question
of all time.
I'm like 300 years old, so I have to ask about some guy. Do you know who Abraham Lincoln is? Did you ever meet him?
I've heard of him. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's funny. You kind of you forget how old you are. And like
Richard, Richard, do you remember when Kennedy was shot? Like, were you alive then?
Yeah, I was a little kid though. I was like 40.
God.
I think I was 40. So you do remember Robert Redford, right?
I do.
Yeah. So he was a very prolific actor. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, the Sting, All the President's Men. That was cool.
Wasn't he in the China Syndrome too, or was that?
That was Jack Lemmon, I think.
Jane Fonda was in it, but I thought he was in it too.
Okay. No, I perhaps 3 Days of the Condor, The Natural. I liked All the President's Men. That was the take on the water break-in. It was interesting.
Watergate.
Yeah, Watergate. I stayed at that hotel. You ever stayed at that hotel?
Never.
I was at a conference. I was at a conference there, but I've never stayed there.
Yeah, somebody tried to break into my room, if you know what I'm saying. But anyway, he was a very prolific actor, and then he became a producer, and he did, was a very prolific producer. I don't know if you saw this question. Do you know the Menendez brothers?
Yes.
So do you have an opinion whether those guys should stay in prison or get released? I know you've been studying this question for quite some time.
Yeah, it's interesting. So there, I think there's a Netflix documentary as well as a series that's I don't know. It feels like they're trying to create some level of revisionist history.
Yeah, bingo.
Yeah, so
bingo.
At least that's I'm not a juror. I didn't see all the evidence, right? So I'm seeing documentary viewpoints, which are always, catered for us. Well, at least in my opinion, they're catered for a specific outcome. I don't think that. I don't know. I don't know the merits of the claims, but I think what they did and what they admitted to doing is pretty heinous. So I think it's revisionist history.
Exactly. Those fuckers are guilty. They need to stay right where they're at.
Well, I don't think it's a question whether they were guilty or not, or whether they committed the act. I guess the issue was whether they were abused. I think that was the defense.
They're fucking full of shit.
But what's interesting? Okay,
they're guilty.
What's interesting about I don't remember which one, but he was in a jail cell next to OJ at the same time in the LA County jail. So they must have been good buddies. I don't know. Just to
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know that either.
I was very aware of that because I was old enough to be aware of it. And that was a huge thing in LA, obviously, at the time. And I used to ask, at times, I would ask deposition questions about various actors in various cases that weren't involved in my case, just to see if anybody was paying attention. So I would ask, like in a deposition about some other matter, I'd ask a question about OJ, something like that, just to kind of see what would happen. But anyway, I think they're trying to get out, and I think that the way it's set up is that at some point in time they will, unless things change. It won't be like today, but maybe 3-5 years or something like that. Just like I guess Maxwell is in a honor ranch somewhere in Texas. I think in Texas, and I'm sure she deserves the honor to be at the honor ranch. It's really interesting how our judicial, speaking of somebody, it's interesting how our judicial system works and how decisions are made, and interesting. Any comment?
I don't know how to spell justice, so nope.
The other thing that caught my attention was that the DOJ, and I just find this confusing more than anything else. The DOJ is going to take action against hate speech. So it's a concern because of the First Amendment. And obviously it comes up, I think, in part because of the assassination of Charlie Kirk and the people that spoke out, afterwards in a, obscene way, degrading the event, whether, you cared for him or not really appropriate. But I think that it arising out of that and other events, that's something. And I find that really difficult because of the First Amendment issue. I mean, the reason why that the election campaigns are funded to the extent they are is because of the First Amendment. That there's a Supreme Court case that says you can't limit the funding because that's somehow inhibits the First Amendment. Blocking speech. Now I understand, there's the basic rules, like you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. All the stuff we hear about, but negative speech, I don't feel comfortable. I'm not going to agree with it, but I don't feel comfortable if people are targeted because they speak that way. Because the way I always think is today it may be the other side, and the next day it's going to be my side. It's going to kind of go back and forth. Do you guys have any opinions about that particular issue?
Yes, I have strong opinions about it, and I think
I do too.
Yeah, I'm all for protections of free speech, and I don't remember who. It might have been a conversation between Lex Friedman and Elon Musk, but talking about free speech and the viewpoint of free speech and what the First Amendment means to, and I can't remember which of them described it, but being able to your adversary being able to say whatever they want to say. The people, free speech is to protect the things that you don't want to hear, that you don't want to be brought. And I could not possibly agree more. If there can't be any level of controversy, if you start with any level of limitation of what is deemed controversial free speech, I don't think you have to guess where that ends up. You can look no further than what's happening in the UK, and what may have started with the best of intentions. I don't think any one of us three advocates or condones hate speech in any way. No. But when you start letting someone decide what is hateful speech, then it's a slippery slope that erodes forever.
Yeah.
Right.
We're going to say, Jer?
My personal opinion is, and this has been my position for years. The government doesn't belong in the bedroom, and the government doesn't belong telling me what I can and can't say. It's just that simple. When the government starts popping their head in my bedroom, and when the government starts limiting what I can say, whether that's burning a flag or kneeling in front of the crucifix and praying, that's a fucking problem. That's when our institutions start failing to truly govern us.
So I think Kurtis said he doesn't believe in any kind of restriction. So how about the example I gave you where, there's a restriction on yelling, yelling fire in a
Well,
theater.
that's different. We're talking about inciting violence or inciting some level of panic. This notion that, if you're arresting someone for standing out front of Charlie Kirk's memorial and saying, I didn't like Charlie Kirk, he was a fucking asshole, that's a problem. But if you're arresting that same person for acting like a complete idiot, pushing people around, trying to incite violence, all while yelling the same thing about Charlie Kirk, that's an entirely different situation. But the fact that there are people outside protesting Charlie Kirk's service or whatever, and you're now arresting them because you believe what they were saying was hate speech, I got a fucking problem with that. I didn't know Charlie Kirk. Honestly, I have no opinion. I had no opinion on him one way or another. But, assassinating people and then arresting people for holding an opinion on that assassination are two entirely different things.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with you. I think there obviously have to be some very, very limited limitations, kind of we discussed. But when government gets to call out what's okay and what's not, then we got a problem.
Well, it's not really what's okay. I think there's a fine line there. It's about what I can say and what I can't say. When the government starts limiting what my free opinion of what the government is doing, that's when it becomes a problem. If I'm going to get arrested because I say, look, President Obama was a piece of shit and President Trump is a piece of shit, that's a problem.
Yeah, no, I agree. You should be able to criticize everybody. Yes, sir?
I do have a question, though. JR, you said you don't believe that the government belongs in the bedroom, yet you seem to have been literally screwed by FINRA and the SEC for the past 2.5+ years. So what are your thoughts on that?
FINRA is a private entity. It's not government.
But
I don't know how to answer. Yeah, FINRA's not a governmental agency, Kurtis. Haven't you fucking learned anything?
But what of the SEC that is supposed to?
Well, those were pretty good fuckings, so I appreciated it. No, it's just how that's been my position all along. When the government starts sticking its nose in what I'm doing in my house, if I'm not doing anything illegal, but there's the whole purpose of them sticking their nose in my house is to control what I'm doing or saying. That's a real problem. It's a real problem. That's what happens in Russia and in China and all these other communist, semi-communist, capitalist economic countries. That's what happens over there. There's a reason China censors all of those things, pornography, certain topics on political topics. That shit can't happen in the United States. And when it does happen in the United States, that's when the rest of our institutions will start to fall. And when those other institutions start to fall, that's when we become closer to China and Russia and all those other countries like that.
You don't have a strong opinion.
No, not at all.
What do you think about having a National Guard or Army in performing? I'm going to call it a police function, but you'd call it differently. Performing a police function in cities. You have any opinion on that?
It's interesting. I know it's controversial. Short term, I think it has obviously tangible effects, and I think they've been, at least short term, overwhelmingly positive. I do worry about, no different than an occupying military, what happens when you remove the guard. The plan after the plan is
right. Do you remember? Do you ever see the movie where Denzel Washington and I think Bruce Willis is a general? They have a bunch of terrorism in New York. They bring in Bruce Willis to kind of take over in the army, and he tells them before he does that, you don't want us in here. You don't want us in here. And so I kind of feel that way. It makes me really uncomfortable when the military is in the cities, because it makes me feel like they're not performing. They're performing a civilian function, and it's I know they were out here in LA. I had an idea of what was going on. When you're not in a location, whatever was going on in LA was about as close to me as it was to you. So it had as much impact on me as it was to you. And I'm probably like 40 miles from downtown LA. And within LA, that that the area of whatever nonsense was going on, that was approximately, I think, 1 square mile out of 500 square miles of LA. So if you're looking at something, from a distance, obviously, you focus on something, it gives you a certain vision of what's going on that may not, be realistic. And you could certainly influence people and manipulate them and motivate them by showing things in a particular way. So all that stuff concerns me because I'm not a big trusting person of the government, of any government, to be honest, in any country. I don't think like at this point in time, I'm not a huge fan anywhere. That's my view. Did you want to add anything, Jer?
It's a safe stance, right?
Yeah.
I think the more educated that, at least I don't want to speak for anybody else, but I don't know. There's like a sense of enlightenment, and you wish you could go back to blissful ignorance where you didn't question everything that you heard or the intent or who it was serving and what the reality of each situation was. So no, I share your skepticism.
JR, anything you wanted to add?
I think in the short term, if they're going into some of these cities like Chicago and cleaning up the crime and putting an end to the gun violence and that kind of stuff that's going on and illegal gun violence, I'm for it. But when it turns into more of an occupation, that's when I have a problem with it. If we're talking going in and cleaning up the streets for 2 or 3 months and then they're on their way out, sure. And to your point, it is nerve-wracking. I can remember going to the airport soon after 9/11, and the National Guard is there with military assault rifles. That was surreal. That was just a very strange feeling. So I can appreciate what the average American person is thinking when they walk by someone like that on the streets of Chicago. But at the same time, if it's short term and it's there to assist local authorities, and the local authorities are still the ones that are in charge, I don't have an issue with that short term.
I guess as Bruce Willis said, unfortunately, they're not trained to be police. So that's
Right.
that's the difference. They have a different kind of, and that's not their fault. It's just kind of like an unfortunately an obvious fact. Anything else before I close you out? Because you guys have been so gracious to spend all this time. We're almost, we're going on an hour and a half. Do you have anything you wanted to add to anything before I finish this out?
Well, I'll ask because I'm asked this question constantly, but I'm interested to hear your opinions. What do you think? Regardless of the investor community, right? Whether it's GTI, whether it's MMTLP, what do you think has proven to be the most effective, and what do you think are the most effective tactics that we can contribute? Obviously, the companies can take their own angles, their own strategy to help move the ball forward. But what do you think are the most effective actions that we can do as investors?
It depends on. Is this directed at me or JR?
Both.
What, you want to go first, JR?
Yeah, I think the thing that has been the most effective has been the grassroots organization that came out of X very early on for MMTLP. The fact that, it has been 3 years, and it fucking sucks. There's people that are still hurting. There's people that are continuing to hurt. But the fact that you go onto a space, and I encourage, this, I go onto spaces anonymously and I listen, but the fact that I can still go onto a space and listen and look and scroll and see the same people that I've talked to for the last 3 years. And oh, by the way, there's 300 plus people on a space at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday in July, almost 3 years after the halt. I think that's been the most effective thing. And then that with MMTLP has morphed into, you can go on and there's a GME space, or there might be, a Coinbase space, and people just talking about what's going on in the market. I personally, I was on X for about a year before I even got involved in MMTLP. And I don't know if they didn't have the feature then or what, but my first recollection of seeing any spaces of substance on X was the MMTLP spaces. But then to look at what has happened, and Richard, I'm going to blow smoke up your ass again, but if you take what happened with the MMTLP spaces and how Richard and I progressed from focusing on MMTLP to getting a little bit involved in GTII, a little bit more involved in GTII, a little bit more involved in GTII, and now all of a sudden you look at the last year with GTII, and Richard is knee deep in this thing. The company's in conservatorship, and that's all because of, I feel like, that grassroots organization that started with MMTLP that kind of educated us, and then Richard kind of taking a deeper dive into GTII, and now here we are, a year and a half later, and the whole GTII situation is just amazing to me, from where it started to where it's at right now. So I think the most effective thing that we have done and that we can continue to do is what we're doing: talking, educating, these YouTube streams, being on X, keeping in the loop, and just all of that community-based action.
So I have, of course, a little bit of a different, this is more of a radical strategy. So this is something that I've kind of quietly spoke about in the background. And, it's risky. It's a much riskier strategy. So that's why I haven't really been front and center.
This ought to be good.
But I come from my, I was born in 1958. So I was around in the 60s a little bit. I was around in the Vietnam War. I was pretty conscious as a little kid. So I was kind of aware what was going on. So, the kind of stuff that I would recommend, if people were okay with it, would be like occupying the SEC and having news crews there and having people videotape it while we're doing a sit-in at the SEC. And if they asked you to leave, you could leave, and you repeat it. And I would do the same thing in congressional offices. I would make a huge stink. I wouldn't do it in any nothing violence, but I would literally take over so that they were forced to talk about the issues. That's what I would, that was kind of my view of things. Now, it's risky because people get arrested and, like that. But on the flip side, if people are willing to get, sometimes people are willing to get arrested for various things, because usually the outcome will be very, if you get arrested for kind of like hanging out in the SEC, you're probably not going to go to Rikers Island for the rest of your life, I don't think. But that's kind of my thought process, is to kind of take it up front and make it so it can't be ignored. So I want JR to be leading that movement.
Yeah, I'll get right on it.
Do you have any of your own tactics that you would like to utilize that you haven't been able to utilize?
Well, I family man and work a lot, so I could not foresee occupying a regulatory office or Wall Street for that matter. But
Occupy. Oh, you just gave it to me. Occupy SEC. That's perfect.
Yeah. I do think it can be effective for a soundbite, right? And getting some answers and having to acknowledge the issue. What do you do after that is the question, and acknowledging the problem. It's interesting. I don't think there's anything that any specific tactic other than just talking to, I don't have a bat phone that I can just pick up and call the president and explain the situation. So, going through the coaching tree, going through the org chart has been interesting.
Coaching tree.
Yeah, that's what it
Tell
is.
Tell us you're in the corporate world without telling us you're in the corporate world.
It's what it is.
You're referring to governmental officials or representatives or whatever in general.
All of the above.
Yeah.
It's been a learning curve. Lots of gatekeepers, but when you find the right track, it's been effective. But it's hard to do the work and then share a repeated blueprint when there are people that make their every effort to thwart your every bit of progress. So
who do you think, by the way, who do you think pays those people? Well, let me back up. Do you think those people are being paid? And if so, who do you think's paying those people?
I can tell you. I can tell you a couple.
Wait, I missed it. I was reading the question. What happened?
I was waiting for Kurtis to tell me who's. Is it Elon? Is that who's doing it?
Definitely not Elon.
Okay.
Or at least none that I have found. None
is
of
it
them
Jeff
are Elon.
Bezos? Jeff Bezos? No?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
No.
Do you have any other anybody you want to say?
Might be a market participant.
Okay.
Might
you
be.
think that's legal?
It is absolutely not.
Okay. Might be like securities fraud or something like that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Would be an interesting paper trail.
Yeah. The concern is, like, do you think, like, and I have no reason to, by the way, suspect that he's involved in this at all. But I'm just kind of using him as an example. But, like, if somebody like Ken Griffin wanted to, like, block something, he's got a lot of dough. And he's got even more than JR, I think. It's close, but it's, just a little bit. How do you win against somebody like that when you go against, somebody with that kind of wealth?
Well, when someone like that picks a fight with someone that has power and authority, then that sometimes would be meeting your match. That's at least that's what I predict. But we'll see how that plays out.
Now, I heard some rumors. I don't know if these are true, but I heard some rumors that after you finish this live stream tonight, that you're having dinner with Ari Rubenstein. Is that correct or not correct?
That's brunch tomorrow morning.
Brunch tomorrow morning.
Have you ever, just to get this out in the open, have you ever spoken to Ari Rubenstein?
No.
Would you like to?
Who's Ari Rubenstein?
Let me ask you a question. What would you ask him if you had, one question to ask him? What would you ask him?
I don't know. I probably don't have to ask how you circumvent processes because there's a pretty substantial blueprint for how to repeat that. So I'd probably ask like where you have been for the last 16 months and where you get that sweet tan and any beach recommendations, things like that. Just personal things, nothing to do with securities.
Do you think there's any need for FINRA?
I think FINRA's function is necessary. I think FINRA as a separate organizational structure is entirely unnecessary. And I think it's intentionally structured to circumvent transparency. So I don't need to tell you that because you've tried and been sent down the arbitration process. But the way that the structure and MMTLP is a perfect example. When push comes to shove, it allows the SEC to point at FINRA, and FINRA gets to go, well, regulatory immunity. I'm going to go ahead and play that card over and over and over again and avoid any level of accountability or transparency. So no, in their current structure with the power of regulatory immunity, FINRA is not just, should they exist? No, they should not exist. That those functions should be rolled into the SEC.
Yeah, I agree, because the SEC should have the capabilities of doing it. And it's not like there is, unlike what we think that should happen, there's very few cases that happen through the SEC and FINRA. The number really is a small number. And if you can't effectively run that, then you really shouldn't exist, period. If the SEC can't manage that, then what do we need them? What do we need them for? And obviously FINRA is a impediment to retail. It's not helpful. It's designed to, in essence, to protect its members. We know, because we've gone through all the silly fines, and then whether they collect the fines, and it's obviously not for our benefit at this point in time.
If there was ever a litmus test, it was MMTLP, because there was a fork in the road, and FINRA went out of their way Right. It wasn't like it was a very easy decision. They went out of their way and continued to double, triple, quadruple down on the decision to protect their institutional investors and not retail investors.
Yeah, I agree. Anything else you want to add before I let you guys go?
No, thanks for having me. It's always fun. Always fun to share some laughs with you guys.
Before I let you go, of course, why does no one own an Xbox in Pennsylvania? Because
I don't know.
Because it's always Sony in Philadelphia.
These are so bad.
Yeah, they're always bad.
Yeah, that's
last but not I can't even read my own writing. Oh, I can't read my writing, so I can't say it. I can read my writing, just it doesn't make any sense, but that makes a lot of sense, honestly. I wanted to thank you for spending all your time with us and kind of telling us what's going on. It's always appreciated. JR, it's obviously JR. It's always fun. As things happen and as you get more information, obviously I always love you having come on and kind of update us. I do listen to space calls and always interesting, and I appreciate all your efforts. And if you want any last word?
Well, likewise, definitely appreciate the heck out of both of you, and thanks for all of your knowledge that you have shared and continue to share with the community. So, even though it's not legal advice,
thank you. But before I let JR say anything, I figured out my writing. What is it? The Muslims' favorite American TV show? It's only some Muslims, by the way. It's not all. Some Muslims' favorite American TV show. It's always Sunni in Philadelphia.
that was a Shiite joke.
The joke. Look, the joke sucked tonight. Seriously, they were fucking atrocious. Seriously,
I appreciate it. Anyway, thanks for your time, everybody, and thanks for hanging out with us. And be well, and we'll talk to you soon. Have a great night. And again, thanks, Kurtis, and thanks, JR.